Alrighty, we'll get going here, and don't worry, I'm not going to flood you guys with too many wildlife pictures, but I want to show you how we've integrated that into bringing people to the farm, youngsters, and even people who, didn't want anything to do with agriculture or the farm. But how many of you can tell what my hobby outside of farming is? Y'all might think it's deer hunting, and it is. But the most important hobby I have is getting youngsters involved in the wildlife side and on our farm, and kind of building a team atmosphere. I also get asked the question, when are you going to know that doing this type of cropping system is going to work? How do you know it's working? And I always tell people, well, there will be signs. And we were fortunate enough to take this deer 3 years ago, and he's the number 2 crossbow kill state record in the state of Kansas. And those young men there got to enjoy it with me. So lots of times, this was a new farm that we were able to get about 3 years ago, and I set up a feeder and I set up a trail camera, and we got that monster buck in the background. But how many of you also noticed that Boone and Crockett raccoon in the bottom corner taking a selfie? Anytime, like Dr. Clapperton said, anytime you want to go to your farm, look around, be observant. And so I want to give you a practical approach to what we do on our farm. And like I said, we've got time here today, and I really appreciate the presentation that she did here prior to this one. There's a couple people in the next slides that I want to give credit for, but I want to show you, this is one of the most important slides to me. Tell me and I'll forget, teach me and I may remember, but if you involve me, I'll learn. And coming up here, I'm going to show you some people that involve me. But this is where we started. Not going to go into great detail, but I made my living building houses out of college. I was a general contractor in Kansas City, framing houses, and I was a general contractor for the last 10 years of that. And along about the time that 9/11 happened, the housing market crashed. Some other tough things in life happened, and I decided it was time to get back to the farm if I was ever going to do it. And so that's how I started. I had 60 acres. I went to the bank and got a loan. I bought that 4420 combine at a farm auction, and I farmed 60 acres, and I did construction work on the side to supplement my income. Then I met the guy in the middle. There's Gabe Brown. The guy on the right is my dad. And then the guy on the left is Russell Hedrick. And I guess I'm so old, I knew Russell Hedrick before he became Russell Hedrick. That's the first time that I know of that he met Gabe in person, and that's in my house. And my dad passed away 3 years ago, but my dad was always in the thick of things with us. So we run a British white cattle herd. Don't shoot me because I got white cows. But, I'll show you some more pictures here in a minute of the grazing mix. But I guess the reason I take time off my farm to be here today to share soil health message is because of that guy right there. And Dave Brown did more for me than anybody. Encouraging me to do things different, to walk that line when not a lot of people were doing it. And when I was driving up here today, I recalled the first time that I met Dave at his farm was actually Dr. Clapperton was there doing a field day for him. And can you imagine wanting to get into no-till and farming and sitting and listening to her presentation, cold turkey, not having a lot of, it's like, you just like a bomb went off in your head and you're like, I don't even know what piece of that I'm supposed to take and how I'm supposed to apply that. And then this guy grabs me and he says, you drove all the way from Kansas? And I said, yeah. He said, be out to my farm about a half hour before it starts. And he goes, I'll take you around. So he threw me in his side-by-side. We drove around to a couple fields around his house there, and he started digging in the soil. And that little act of kindness did more for me because he involved me. And that's why I put that slide in there. So we're just trying to pay it forward, and I'm just trying to share you a practical approach to what we do on our farm here in our local area. Obviously, anytime you're trying to grow, anytime you're trying to do things a little different or learn, there's always the weight of people telling you you can't do it, that they're going to do something else, you're going to fail. A good example of this is when everybody's spraying insecticide for armyworms and you're not doing it. And you're afraid every armyworm in the county is going to be in your field. So it takes a certain amount of courage and it takes a certain amount of guts to step out here and try to do some things. And that's why I'm glad y'all are having, soil health meetings like this so we can collaborate together, because not only do the multi-species cover crops collaborate together, but people also should. Like, I'm never going to be a soil scientist. I'm a very practical person. I can tell you a lot about building houses and stuff like that. I can tell you a lot of what I've learned about farming, but there's organizations that work together, and I'm a firm believer, even though it's difficult sometimes, that a team can always accomplish more than an individual. So let me start showing you some slides of what it would look like if you dug a soil pit at my house. The reason I say my house is because that's the foundation to my house. There's a reason we don't have a walkout basement. If you notice there, 26 to 32 inches of soil, that's what I get to farm with. So anything I'm losing on top through erosion of any kind is a detriment to me. This isn't Iowa, this isn't Illinois, and I don't have soil 6 feet deep. At Dave Brandt's place, they had a backhoe, and I forget the guy that was in the pit, but I was just blown away that you could have roots 5-6 feet deep and be finding earthworms, 3-4 feet deep down in there. And so I came home and I thought, oh man, I'm going to do this. I'm going to change the world. And, well, I can change the top 2 feet. I don't think I can change that into soil there. But the name of our township's called Rock Creek Township. And we do have rock quarries around there. So sometimes I think some of this farmland could be a rock quarry. But I want to show you here some damaging pictures. Then we'll get on to the positive side of things. So one of the first no-till meetings I ever went to was right up the road here at Overbrook. I have a brother-in-law that's been long-term no-till. And when I was thinking about getting out of the building business, he said, hey man, why don't you come to a meeting with me? And it was just right up the road here. I think we had pizza that night. And that's been a long time ago. And I started noticing things like this around my area after the combines would roll through the fields. That used to always bother me even when I wasn't farming, but after I saw the degradation that was causing, it really started bothering me. Then I started seeing sprayer tracks. That's corn. One of the years, I don't remember which year, that we had a real wet spring and they were desperate to get out there to spray it before it got too tall. Here's the erosion. This is right down the road from my house that we'll see. This field had 5 terraces break over. See all that topsoil right there? And then it overruns that terrace, overruns the next terrace. One of the things I do on the side in the wintertime to make a little extra money is I have an excavator and I have a track hoe, and I'll dig ponds and do tree work and whatnot. And so this is a pond I was digging out. And back in the drought in 2012, I dug out 9 ponds. And I remember going across my neighbor's pond, sitting in my excavator, making a lane, going all the way across the pond. And at one point, I could look out the window eye level with the soil in the pond. I was about 6 feet up in the air. That's what 50 years of silting in his pond did. It's astounding when you pull out the soil out of these ponds and you see how rich it is, and you just wonder what fields it came from. So I try to take pictures of things that we do. This is a neighbor of mine when they were planting soybeans that year. Now, granted, it was on 10-inch centers with a drill, but that's the pictures you'll see. This is what you'll see. We were planting corn. That's our planter. It's can be set up, obviously for 15-inch rows on soybeans, but you don't see the dust all over that thing. You can see the residue out there. That's what I like to see. This picture is really one I'm proud of. I don't have time to go into all the detail, but you see that terrace right across there. I had an opportunity to buy this farm about 7 years ago, and it just so happened it's on the corner of Waverly, where everybody that goes into the booming metropolis of Waverly can see this. And the other guy that used to farm it was a full tillage guy, and every year there would be a ditch on this end of it, wore out, and all the soil running down into the creek, because what you can't see is there's a creek right there going into Waverly. So we took it over, we started no-tilling it, doing the rotation of our cash crops, keeping the residue on the soil. Wheat's growing in that picture right there, but I've had that place 7 years now, and that terrace has never ever broke over. So, you know, we can build, we can admin, we can fix things, and I've seen some tragic situations. So we added cattle to our operation. We chose to go with the British Whites because of our direct marketing business, and I also needed a breed of cattle that was supposed to be a lot calmer, because I'm a novice, or was a novice then, at dealing with cattle. Obviously, you can get knotheads in any group, but for the most part, I really enjoy them. You know, soil without biology is simply geology, and that's true. That's 2013. That might have been my second year of doing diverse mixes, and I started doing them in my food plots, and you'll see the correlation when we get going. But you can see the platiness in that soil. That's not good looking aggregate stability. But when I started digging in there and I started coming up with earthworms like that, I was like, that is awesome. You can also see the ladybug there beside it. I took a picture of this slide. You know, if you ask me what we're about on our farm, it's getting that organic matter levels on the upward trend. You know, the higher your organic matter level is, you can see your water holding capacity increases. And then, like Dr. Clapton just talked about, the recycling of the nutrients for the toxins in the soil and whatnot. So I want to show you a couple pictures of what we started doing with our garden. Now, no fertilizer was added to this, but we have a chicken operation, about 200 chickens, and we move them through our backyard. And so a lot of chicken litter was there when we planted that. I would recommend to you, if you would want to do the sweet corn the way I did it there, it's a little hard to pick walking through there, but nevertheless, it was a fun project. So I hired some help, stuck my SkyTrack in there with the bucket, and I let him start lobbing them out there into the bucket. But it was unreal, the amount of vegetables that we got out of that garden that year. And we try to do it every year. Some years it rains more, some years it doesn't. But not only did we have sweet corn, we had unbelievable amount of different types of squash, cucumbers, zucchini. You know, we were trying to do a food bank and help some of the folks in Waverly that were in need. And I honestly couldn't hire or get enough help to pick it all. And what I really couldn't get enough help for was picking the pumpkins. And if y'all think that's cool, that was just one trailer load. It was actually 3 trailer loads that looked like that. And at one time I figured up how many pumpkin pies we could make, but I can't remember what it was. But the majority of those pumpkins on the far right are all pie pumpkins. And so that's one of the things I like to do, is to no-till pumpkins into a cover crop. Sometimes my year gets busy and I don't get it done, but we had all the spaghetti squash. We had some gourds out there. And boy, if you want people to about wreck their car driving down the highway, just do something like that out there. So just going to show you some slides on, you know, how we incorporate our crops and whatnot. This is drilling soybeans into standing rye. The rye isn't as thick there as I would like it to be. That was about 50 pounds of rye that year. I normally like it to be, you know, 80 to 90 pounds. But that's us drilling soybeans in there. I'm the odd duck in the room. Rye's a great cover crop. There's nothing wrong with using it. I personally like triticale for the easiness of knocking it to the ground. If you're growing soybeans and you like to plant your soybeans later in the year, triticale matures 3 weeks beyond rye, so it gives you a later planting window. But either way, you're looking at tremendous weed control right there. Some years, you get a wet year, and the rye, this is triticale in this picture, gets a little far down the line on maturity, but I took this picture to show you we still planted into it. These are all non-GMO soybeans that we're planting here. In this picture, I don't have this anymore, but I tried a cultipacker. I've never owned a roller crimper. I do think they have their place, but I was using a cultipacker when I first got going. So one of the things I was doing yesterday was planting oats, and sometimes you don't get your cover crops planted in the fall because of weather or whatever the problem may be. You can always fall back on oats in the springtime. If I get home in time tonight, I'll probably be planting more cover crop oats ahead of soybeans in a couple other fields. But that's us going in there with non-GMO soybeans, and we were able to lay that down with that drill for the most part, and I didn't have to roll it down. Here's an example. If it plays, it'll play. So we have standing triticale here, and I play this video for food plotters too. I realize people aren't going to go out and buy that expensive a drill for 1 acre of food plots. But it's a 1590 drill that's 15 foot wide. There's a 15-foot I&J roller crimper on the loader of that Kubota tractor, and that's a landlord of mine that I've worked with in the past. And if I had a perfect scenario for how I'd like to see that laid down, it would be that right there, rolling and planting all in one pass. However, I cover several acres. I'm not the biggest farmer in the world. We farm about 2,000 acres, and sometimes it's hard to get over everything. And they don't make a 40-foot crimper that you can push in front of your tractor that I know of. So there are ways to get around it, but I want to show you some pictures. So here's some non-GMO beans coming up. That was into that later maturing triticale that you saw the red drill. That's 4 weeks in with no post-spray. And these are the 9950 Willcross soybeans, the non-GMO soybeans that Willcross sells. They do have a buyback program on them. If you want to know more about that, you can talk to me afterwards. So that's what we started doing way back when. Even about the same time Dave Brandt switched over to non-GMO, I remember him and I talking about it a lot. And I had a weigh wagon out there one year, and I did side-by-side trials. And as long as I could keep the weeds under control, my non-GMO beans kept up with, at the time, with what they were putting out there, which I think the beginning of Liberty Link was coming in, things of that nature. So that's the field that we accomplished in 2017. Like I said, when I was first started farming, and guys I work for in my area, my county is Coffee County. It's probably not a whole lot different than up here. We don't have very much bottom ground at all, and I don't farm any of it. But I think our county average is 28 or 32 bushel to the acre on soybeans. And when you consider that we were getting a premium for those, it was substantial. So I tried to throw multiple pictures in here from multiple years, so you wouldn't think it was a one-hit wonder that we got lucky one year, and it worked out. But you gotta have your cover. I would never do non-GMO crops if I didn't have a cover crop, because to rely on chemical alone is going to be a rough go in soybeans. There's some non-GMO soybeans. You can see the weed control. So I just took some pictures of the corn. I don't do a lot of corn. I do some. We do a lot of cereal crops, soybeans. I'm doing more and more milo every year. But the 2 years of corn are from my no-till corn 2 years ago. There's tillage corn on the left. It was planted a little bit later, so there is some variance there. But here it is during the hot spell that we had 2 years ago. My corn's over there on the left, and on the far right, and then the fields of no-till corn are there in the middle. And y'all think, well, I just went out there and I picked, you might think that I went out there and picked the best ears, but I harvested those 2 fields in the middle because I custom harvest those crops. So I was able to see what the yield monitor was telling me. So if we don't put a cover crop out there, there's what you're going to see. The drill decided to shut off on its own one day. I didn't know it till after that barley came up, and I walked out there and the mare's tail and everything was just coming like gangbusters right there. So if you don't plant anything out there, something's going to grow, and most often it's weeds. So I want to show you the improvement we've made in the soil. So, a lot of field cultivating going on. This is what I used to do. This is what my soybean plants used to look like because I just didn't know any better. And thank goodness guys like Dave Brandt were willing to share their story. So this is just observations I make from different crop fields that are next to mine, comparisons. It's amazing how many cars are parked along the edges of our fields and how many people are walking out there digging around trying to figure out what we're planting. So it doesn't bother me to sneak across the way and pull a plant or two to see how the soil condition is. This is what we started out with, even though we had mulch on top, and that's one of our first years of no-till. You can see the platiness in that. When that gets hot and dry, that root cannot get through there. So that's what we have today. And if I could just show you one picture in this whole presentation and stop the presentation, it would be that. I would say just accomplish that and the rest of it will fall into place. So when I was selling soybean seed, I used to own a seed facility down in Marion, and I had a cover crop company, and I sold non-GMO seed. I was always out scouting, and these are all plants of mine. But you can see the far left ones in a first-year no-till system. The 2 in the middle were in a 4-year system, and then you can see the one on the right was a long-term no-till system. But those soybeans were not treated with anything. So there was nothing, zero seed treatment. And look at the roots on those babies. You want to know how to make your soybeans last longer? In a drought, get your root down to the moisture. That was second year. Look at the nodulation on those roots. That was a 4765. I will tell you this, from good grief, the company I just blanked out on the company I used to grow that for. But anyway, they needed seed developed, and they had some foundation seed, and they asked me if I would grow it. Never grew them before, but I was pretty gung-ho. And I said, just give me what you've got. I'll get them planted. I planted them, no-tilled them into rye at the time, I believe. They were a 4765. That 160 acres that we're standing in right there made 65 bushel that year. And I sold them back to them for $15 a bushel. I wish I could duplicate that every stinking year. But once in a while, you can hit a home run. And what was special about that with me, the part of the story I haven't told about my dad is I always have to give him all the credit in the world, because when I came home after one of the first meetings I had, I said, Dad, you're going to think I'm nuts. There's some things I want to try on our farm. And I said, I know you're going to think I'm nuts when I tell you this stuff, but would you just give me 5 years? And at the end of the 5-year period, if we're not more profitable, if things aren't turning around, if we're not seeing the benefits of doing this, then I'll have to find something else to do, or I'll go back to the way we were doing it. And he said, all right. He said, I can live with that. So when we were harvesting these soybeans, I called him because I saw what the yield monitor was doing. And it was running 62, 63, 65 from one end of the field to the other and never changing. It wasn't going way up and it wasn't going way down. And so I knew we had something special for us. And I called him and I said, you might want to come ride in the combine. And he still has a video on his Facebook page my dad died 3 years ago, but he still has a video of this on his Facebook page, I think. And anyway, he's sitting in the combine, and he had never seen 65 bushel soybeans in his life in our area. I hadn't either. And he looked at me and he says, you're good to go. Forget the 5-year period. And that was a proud moment for me, because I'm like, well, because, as a son, you come to your dad a lot of times with some really weird ideas, and this was one of them that wasn't so weird. So I was driving down the gravel road. This is a waterway behind my house, and I was driving down the gravel road after a rain event. I believe it was in the springtime. And I saw that cloudy water, and I just did a double take. I'm like, what in the world? So I ran back to the house, grabbed the four-wheeler, drove all the way across the field, and I went out there. And I had to take that video. And the line was just unreal. I mean, I could see that line from the road when I was driving by. And so the water that's coming into the waterway that's all silty and murky and muddy is from the neighbor's tillage field, where it crosses under the road and then comes into the ditch and filters on down into the pond that I dug out where I was at eye level. So it's probably got 2 feet of silt back in it. But it was just another reminder to me that, yeah, we're on the right path. And, look at the clear water on that one side. So unfortunately, we still have these type of situations. This is right across from my house last year. Had a rain event, the county, I could go on and on and on, but I'll just leave it at this. The county shouldn't have to come out and dig the ditch out every 2 years. So back in the day when I was a little more energetic and I was also a little more gun-ho about doing observations, don't ever be afraid to observe. I took these jars and I thought, we had an inch of rain, and this was the first year or two that I was trying to implement this stuff. And I thought, I'm just going to go around to some of these fields. I didn't trespass on anybody's fields. I just went to the road ditch. But all 3 of these fields had a waterway for this water to filter through. After it had run through the terrace channels, went through the waterway, then it's in the road ditch running to wherever it runs to. I just reached in there, grabbed the deal full in these clear jars, screwed it on there, and it was still raining, and I took a picture. And so I actually harvested the crops off of that tillage field right there. The no-till field was right next to my house, where they no-tilled for several years, but they don't use cover crops. And then mine was first or second year at my house where I used cover crops. I was blown away by that picture. So I went and duplicated it in August after a rain. Even though all 3 of these fields had a monoculture crop growing on them, they all improved. But which one, if you had to take a drink, which one would you want to drink out of? You can see the clouds through the jar coming out of our field. And I think that waterway picture I showed you a minute ago, where the murky water and the clear water were joining, will back this up. So I started seeing things like that, and it really gave me the motivation and drive to continue this, no matter what anybody said. Ray Archuleta let me borrow this picture, pretty famous picture for why we do multi-species cover crops. Everybody told me when I first started, the ground would be so hard we wouldn't be able to farm it. Purple top turnips are not known for their tap roots busting compaction. That's the tillage radish, but you can see the earthworms and stuff in there. So I tried to do a lot of observation. I started playing with these food plot mixes. These are actually cover crop mixes, that really weren't designed for deer. But I was a little spooked because everywhere I farm happens to be near the blacktop. So like if I mess up big, everybody gets to see it. So I went out in my food plots and started playing around with them. And I've got a tremendous amount of slides. I could spend all day talking about this. But then I started noticing the deer. And then I was like, you know what? At this time, I didn't have cattle, but I knew I had a lot of deer. And so I started, quote unquote, mob grazing deer in my food plots. Now, I know some of you in here probably don't care anything about deer, and some of you in here probably want to get rid of all the deer you got on your property so they don't eat all your crops. But we started playing around in these food plots with our cover crops, and then we started implementing them on a large scale. So at any one time on our farm, this would be a scenario of something that we would do. One year, maybe we do soybeans for cash crops. The next year, maybe we do corn. And then I always follow up my corn with wheat or triticale. I like growing my wheat or triticale that I grow for seed behind my corn. I've seen a lot better results than from behind soybeans. I try to get that cereal crop in on any acre in a 3-year rotation, and I really get a multi-species cover crop planted into that cereal crop. after it's harvested. So I do this in my food plots. And I ran around the last 3 or 4 days getting my oat seed planted because I grow oats for a cover crop company. And I plant oats in my food plots right now for a cover crop to suppress the weeds. And then we will come in and plant that warm season mix. When I had my seed company, I named it the Ace in the Hole food plot mix. And I know a lot of people, when they're talking about deer plots, they love clover, they love soybeans, they love standing corn. But if I could show you an ideal picture of what a food plot would look like to me, whether it be for grazing cattle or the deer or the turkey or the quail, that would be it right there. That's not a bad one for your garden either. So, I'm just showing you some more pictures of what we do. The triticale, this is what that particular warm season cover crop mix looked like. Didn't have to use any chemical. Was able to lay the triticale down on the ground. You can see it coming up there. You can see it rowing it. Moisture's good, keeping the soil cool, and then that happens. You can't always control when it gets hot. You can't always control how hot it gets. So I always carry that dude with me. I scratch the soil back. If it's bare, that day it was 100 degrees out. I had soybeans growing in this particular field. And then where I had the cover, you can see it was 82. Now, I'm not a soil scientist or biologist, but I can confirm with my eye and my combine that the cooler you keep that soil in the hotter parts of the year, the more water your plant can take up, the longer they can survive till that next rain comes along. This is double crop soybeans in the drought 2 years ago. Not my farm, thank goodness. But can you guys see the real thick soybeans in that one strip on the left and then the one on the right? Anybody got any idea how that happened? What? Partially. The biggest reason that happened is they baled all the straw off after they cut the wheat. And those are where the windrows were when they baled the straw up. So there was more mulch laying on that area. And I thought, those soybeans made 5 bushel that year. And I thought, what would have happened if they would have spread that mulch out and left it alone behind the combine and not baled it off of there? During that drought in 2012, I got this picture. It's not a pretty picture, but that's that cover crop growing where I had that earthworm that was about yay long. That's a sick looking deer. You can see his rib cages. That picture was taken in the middle of the day. You see his tongue hanging out. He's hot. Ponds were drying up. And when I got that picture, it really started hitting me. Not only could we have the opportunity to take care of the bugs and the wildlife in the soil, but we actually could take care of the wildlife marching around in our fields. And, I'm an avid deer hunter and I like to deer hunt. And so at that time, I hadn't killed any real giant deer or anything like that. But then I started getting pictures like that. That's in the same food plot as we got a rain and it started growing. It's unbelievable what you can do. This was a companion sunflower mix that we grew. We harvested, I believe the cowpeas were with it, and when we harvested, you can see in this little open area, what I did is I harvested triticale off of this field. So I had the residue. I harvested that about the middle of July. I came back in with this cover crop companion mix with sunflowers in it. We got moisture that year. I harvested the sunflowers and the cowpeas at the same time. I later cleaned them because I was able to sell the cowpeas. I was able to sell the sunflowers. What I didn't know at the time is that house on the far side over there had bees. And they came across, I don't own this place, and the landlord came over and he said, man, those people are excited. And I said, what are they excited about? And he goes, oh, they got bees. He goes, they tripled their honey production this year. I said, well, did they pay us for it? He's like, nah. So I'm just saying, that's a perfect example of me just trying to take care of the soil, trying to learn about a companion cover crop. And I had people right next to me that were neighbors that I didn't even know that had bees over there. And so when you talk about a pollinator mix, I had 80 acres of that, and you had to be careful driving in there. I mean, it was a little spooky, a lot of buzzing. So I just want to show you some pictures. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'll spend some time on it. But this is a food plot, and Dan, you probably recognize this. But this is Sudan grass. And so when I was experimenting back then, I got my Sudan grass. This is a monoculture, and I got it way too thick, and I couldn't figure out how we was going to deer hunt this thing. So what I did is I eventually went in there and mowed lanes and tried to funnel the deer past my deer blind. But also what I realized by doing that is if you want to have a successful deer plot, deer need to feel comfortable. They don't want to be spooked. And even in bigger food plots, this was a food plot behind my dad's house that I set up for him. You can see we planted Sudan grass as a perimeter to sneak into the blind. We had water. And I actually repeated that process this year on that exact property and killed a really nice 8-pointer. But I set that property up for my dad to deer hunt that way. And you can use your Sudan grass as a privacy fence, as a screening. But what I was getting at, in bigger food plots, the deer still feel skittish. So if you can break your food plots up into 3 or 4 acres at a time, and they can feel comfortable coming out, not seeing traffic or whatever. We also have a high rate of success with the fawns growing. The predator impact, it's there, but not like it used to be. I actually have to be careful planting my warm season or my cool season mixes into that Sudan grass, because lots of times we'll bump deer out of it. Lots of times we'll bump quail out of it. But when I'm going into deer hunt during the fall, that's what that privacy fence is going to look like before it gets froze out. That's the same thing when you hear grazers talk about stockpiled feed. The cows would have annihilated that thing. The deer will do the same if you give them time. So that's what it looks like on a different farm. That's my privacy fence. That's froze out. That's in a drought 2 years ago. Didn't grow real great, but I still got 5 foot high on it. No fertilizer. This is millet. I'll give you a cheat code if you like the turkey hunt. Plant that in front of your blind. But you didn't hear that from me. Try to take pictures when I'm out in the food plots, looking back at the blind. Is what would a deer think if he or she was standing out here looking at my blind? Is it broke up? Is it secluded? Or is it standing in the wide open? And again, we did this with limited moisture. If you can get this warm season mix out of the ground, I do take phone calls on a weekly basis about how to do food plots from people across the country. And I tell them on this warm season mix, if you can got the moisture to get it out of the ground, they say, when do you plant it? Anytime between the end of May and the middle of July when you have a rain. Get it out of the ground. It usually doesn't take a lot of moisture to get it to do well. And that was one of the things early on in my deer hunting career I didn't realize, or I didn't take advantage of, was these warm season mixes. So there's the lanes I told you about. If you're a deer hunter and you want to have some fun and really mess the does and the bucks up during the rut, actually it doesn't mess the does up, it messes the bucks up. The does, when they're being chased during the rut, they'll run into that cover and then the buck can't find them. And he'll stand in that lane looking both directions, where'd she go? And it's just a cat and mouse game all day long out there, and it's actually pretty comical. But that's how you can set up cover in your food plot. For example, if the wind's blowing the wrong way, where I had my redneck blind, if I want to put a ground blind, I can brush it in on that tree row. I can brush it in that Sudan grass. If I have a high traffic area or I see a particular deer that likes to come out at a certain time of day in a certain area of the field, if you haven't figured out yet, I like options. I like to be flexible. You have to be. The weather does not always cooperate when we want it to. That's those lanes in the middle of the summer, probably about the August time frame. I went in there and I drilled some triticale in the lanes, and I had some turnips come up with it. But you can see the stockpiled feed I have. That's late season. If you want to improve your chances during rifle season, don't miss out on those warm season blends. You can accent your lanes and part of your food plot with cool season stuff anytime the 1st of September, end of August, to take you even deeper into the year. That was that big food plot where I mowed those lanes in it. Then it started teaching me how calm the deer were. And at the time, this has been a long time ago, but this is in September. And the reason I always put this picture in my slide is most people think deer season's in December. Deer season for me starts in September. And I never used to get pictures of big bucks early season like we do now. And it's because we have the privacy area. We have a smorgasbord of food for them. It's crazy. You can increase your chances at seeing a mature deer earlier in the year by implementing this system. And we had 8-foot tall sedan grass that year because we had a lot of rain. Here's what I'm talking about, playing peekaboo. That was a mowed lane for my cattle to graze in, and I was getting ready to move my fence, and that doe kept darting in and out of there, and that buck finally just stood still. He gave up chasing her. These are just some pictures from our farm of animals that we found. You got to be careful. That's how you want to find those sheds, is laying them on your tire, not in your tire. But those are probably some of the bigger sheds we've found. And again, before I started doing cover crops, I never found anything like that. And so people say, well, how do you shed hunt? I farm. I plant wheat. I plant greens. And if I'm top dressing my wheat with my sprayer, it usually gives me a vantage point of looking out there. It's just pretty interesting, some of the things that can happen. We always try to have fun on our farm. If you ain't having fun on our place, then it's a boring time. But these are just, this is in that plot where I mowed the lane. These are some things I did with my dad. But you remember I told you that I try to get landowners involved. I've got people asking me, how do you get landowners involved? And this is a landowner, and he thought doing cover crops was stupid. I had a neighbor trying to get this farm ground from me. There's 80 acres there. It's not great, but it's okay. And they thought I was an idiot. And the cover crop that I planted out there was the companion sunflower mix where we helped all the bees. And this deer starts showing up out there in it. And I had seen it, and I told my neighbor, you got 180 class whitetail out there. And he's like, I ain't got nothing that big. And I said, all right, whatever. I said, he's out there. Well, anyway, he calls me on November 9th, screaming in the cell phone. He says, you got to get over here. I killed him. I get over there and I take that picture and I said, so is this cover crop thing going to work? He said, you can plant cover crops anytime you want. So I'm about done here, but I want to show you the people. I try to integrate kids that maybe don't have a chance to go farming or go hunting as much. My dad gave us all the opportunity in the world, and I always try to give him credit. You can do a lot with habitat management. I have a brush cutter there. I'm mowing down an area where there was nothing but brush growing. I drove by that spot yesterday when I was drilling oats, and there was turkeys right there strutting. We've actually killed 2 giant deer right there in that staging area. Don't think that you can't impact your land in a positive way. And so you think, well, what really got you going? I never thought I would ever see a deer like that on my property, ever in my lifetime. And, those cover crops are what drug that dude in there. That was him in Hardhorn. That's the only video I had of him right there. But he was coming in there to check the food plot out. We were given some awards, and awards are pretty cool. But the biggest award that I get is seeing the smile on these kids' face when we get them out there. We try to incorporate young guns, not just boys. This little gal wanted to meet us at a show we were at. She wanted her picture taken. This little guy, He likes to drag some bass out of the ponds. But I show that picture of that pond. We're keeping soil out of that pond. We're affecting the animals, the wildlife in our area. And so I put that picture in there. I'm about done. I got 2 slides left. I just give all the credit in the world to my dad. There's a lot more that I can say, but I want to give you a real practical approach. Dad gave me the chance to go out and make mistakes, and I tried to make the most of it. My goal on my farm is to use the least amount of chemical, the least amount of fertilizer as possible. And if you ever come to my farm and you want to visit or you want a tour, I'll show you the things that we mess up on. I'll show you the things we do good. But I have seen the ability to grow cover crops with no fertilizer or a little bit. I've seen the ability to grow good soybeans and corn and wheat with fertilizer rates cut drastically, chemical rates cut drastically. And I wouldn't be here if Dad hadn't given me the chance to make some mistakes. I'm glad that there's a diversity in people, just like there's a diversity in cover crops. I'm glad there's soil scientists that can teach us about all those bugs you saw. And by the way, if you're out there picking pumpkins, that black beetle that she was showing up there, that will spook the tar out of you when you're picking pumpkins and that thing's walking out of there. But really, it just doesn't matter how big a buck you kill. You ought to feel like you're a champion no matter what you do. And I don't care if you're orcharding, if you're growing gardens, if you're farming 1 acre, 10 acres, 50 acres, or whatever. You can make a difference on this soil, and you can turn things around. The wind has been unreal this year. It's been relenting. When Kansas people are complaining about the wind, it's bad. Sadly, we saw that accident out there by Oakley on I-70 that claimed those people's lives, those dust storms. That stuff can be limited, if not cut completely away. And to know that we're keeping our soil in place, we're not filling up our ponds, our streams, and we're improving our soil is where it's at with me. There is so much that can be done with wildlife and bringing the quail back, bringing the turkey populations back, improving our deer herd without having to feed extra minerals and stuff that can be done with these cover crops. The nutrient density of your food comes from the higher organic matter levels in your soil. And that aggregate stability, that's all I'm about. I want aggregate stability as deep as I can get it in the profile. I'm not going to stand in the way of anything else you guys got going, but that's it in a nutshell. And I'd be glad to visit with anybody that wants to visit about anything. I'll hang around here the rest of the day, but that's it for the presentation right now.